a little history, a little baseball, and a team that's playing pretty good, even though it is a little bit too late. We're going to get into Aaron Judge. We're going to talk about the series with the Kansas City Royals that's going on right now. We're also going to talk about the preview for the Twins and give you a little update on my predictions for the playoffs that are some okay, some are not okay, but that's all we're going to cover today on The Corner. Before we do that, I do want to remind you that wherever you are at, make sure that you are following Detroit Sports Nation. Hit that like button, click subscribe, pound that bell so that you can get notifications on YouTube when all of our shows drop, and you can also follow The Corner on Twitter at DSN at The Corner for baseball conversation, discussion, debate, whatever fits your fancy. I'll be there to talk to you. So let's jump right into history being made on Wednesday night. And I told you that we're going to keep talking about this because it's something worth talking about. Now, 61 may seem like a number, but it is a standard when it comes to baseball. It is the standard when it comes to American League home runs specifically. And on Wednesday, September 28th, with a line drive bullet to left center field, Aaron Judge tied Roger Maris. 61 years after Roger Maris hit 61, Aaron Judge did the same thing and became the all-time leader in the American League. Now, some don't get too hung up on league leaders when it comes to home runs, and some have argued, even Roger Maris' son, Roger Maris Jr., has argued that if Judge hits 62, that should be the home run record. Now, we've discussed on here, Barry Bonds has the home run record at 73. Steroids or no steroids, he hit 73 home runs. I'm not here to debate that, but I'm here to give you a little history lesson on 61 and why it is so important. In 1961, that year specifically, baseball expanded from 54 games to 162 game schedule, which led to controversy for Roger Maris because they thought that if he broke Babe Ruth's record, who was the standard bearer for home run hitters, in more games than the Babe had, well, then that's not fair. And we know the story, right? For 30 years, there was an asterisk placed next to Roger Maris' 61. And in 1991, that finally came down, 5 years after Maris' death. Now, to get technical on you, Judge hit his 61st home run in the 155th game. So technically, Babe's record still kind of stands in a way, right? He's the only person in 154 games to hit 60 home runs, which, in an article that we'll be publishing on DSN by yours truly later, was more than every team in 1927 than all but three clubs. The Cubs, the Cardinals, and the New York Giants, as well as obviously the New York Yankees, all had over 60 home runs that season. Every other team in the league did not. He was out homering baseball clubs at that time. But we love home runs, but home runs are only part of this story for Aaron Judge because he's currently on pace to win the Triple Crown, as we've mentioned before, which would, in essence, be a huge, monumental, historic moment because the last person, the person to have the most home runs in a Triple Crown season is Mickey Mantle in 1956, who hit 52. So Judge not only is tying and potentially or going to break the American League home run record, but if he wins the Triple Crown, he will also be in a class all by himself as far as Triple Crown winners go. And he's doing something special. Bob Nightingale on Twitter last night asked how much of a pure hitter has Aaron Judge become? Well, when he hit 52 home runs in 2017, he had 54 more strikeouts than hits. This season, he has 5 fewer strikeouts than hits right now. It's important to note that Aaron Judge is not just an all-or-nothing guy. He's got a .314 average. He's driven in 130 runs on the season so far. And he leads the American League in average, home runs, and RBIs, the 3 Triple Crown categories. Whether you value those stats or not, it's still an important accomplishment. And he's also a free agent at the end of the season. But for as great as he's been, it's going to be, and you're going to be very hard-pressed to find teams that pay him for an MVP season that he had that wasn't for them, if that makes any sense. Judge is going to be 31 when he comes up to spring training. April 26th, I believe, is his birthday. He's going to be looking for a payday, and he's going to be looking for a lengthy payday. Dan Zimborski from Fangraphs, he kind of projected this out according to Zips, and he said that according to Zips, it would give him a projection of like a 7 to 8 year at $280 to $290 million. Which, when I was thinking about, okay, I know that there was an article written from DSN of what it would cost to bring the Judge to Detroit. You got to get creative, because you're not going to offer him a 10-year contract. You're not going to pay him till you're 41. You've already done that with Miguel Cabrera. Now, Zimborski will say that the projections for Zips are actually more favorable to Judge than they were for Pujols or Cabrera when they signed their major deals, but they're still not 61 home runs worth of projections. Okay? My thought is, if you want to bring Judge into a team, you sign him to a 5-year deal that potentially could turn into 8 years, with the total money, if he makes the 8 years, being $300 million. That gives him an average annual value at $37.5 million. The first 5 years, fully guaranteed, pay him till he's 36. In year 6, make it a mutual option between the club and the player. If he wants to test free agency one more time, let him test it. If not, then he plays at the 6th year. For year 7 and year 8, you give him vesting options for benchmarks throughout the season that will make his contract vest for year 7, and then make it vest for year 8. Now, the numbers can be fudged, but basically what you're getting is a guy on an 8-year contract for $37.5 million, which would be team-friendly. And we know that the contracts have kind of been screwed up with the way that Correa signed his in the offseason. But if the Tigers are going to make some kind of play, it's going to have to get creative in that sense, because you cannot sign a guy like this for 10 years. It's got to be 5 to 8. Pay him only once average annual salary. That doesn't matter. Front load it, back load it, it doesn't matter. But you got to get creative, and you got to find a way to get out of the bad contracts at the end of them if they aren't working out for you. Not fully guaranteed. Now, that's going to be difficult, and it's going to be a hard sell, but it could be something that potentially could happen. Aaron Judge is having a great season. Will he hit 61? Or he already hit 61. Will he hit 62? I mean, odds are that he's going to get there. With about 7 games left to play, I got to imagine he's going to hit at least 1 home run. And last week I even projected that he'd end up at like 65 home runs. So it's going to be interesting to see, and it's definitely a storyline that I'm going to continually be following. I stayed up last night to just see if he hit 62 in his final at-bat, but he didn't. And that's okay, because at some point he's going to, and it's going to be fun to watch. But what has also been fun to watch have been the Detroit Tigers, who have won 7 of 8 of their last games. Now, listen, when we get into this recap, I understand that this is a little bit of a different type of recap, because there's still a game to play. And I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't project for you what is going to happen in the game today on Thursday. But due to scheduling conflicts and things like that, I had to get this out to you in order to have the content there for you that are watching it. So we're going to talk about the first 2 games, which were great baseball games. And then we're going to move into our preview. And then we're going to also move into our thoughts for the day. Before we do get into this recap, though, I do want to remind you about GearUpDetroit.shop. Get there for all of your original Detroit Sports Nation swag. You can use Corner25 off for a discount. They're comfortable shirts. They get to you quick, and it is a great experience. So make sure that you're on GearUpDetroit.shop. Use Corner25 off to make sure that you get that discount for watching this show. To the recap, okay? We know it's going to be odd. We know there's a game to play here on Thursday. But let's talk about the first 2 games. 2 games that the Tigers have won, and that is now 5 games in a row that they've won, and 7 out of their last 8. The team's playing good baseball. And here's the kicker. The first 2 games that they won were by 1 run each, and game 2 was a game that they won 2-1 on a bullpen day. That's fantastic. Let's talk about game 1, okay? Wentz, he struggled to locate a bit, gave up 3 runs, was struggling, with command, high pitch rate through 5 innings, so they pulled him, which is fine, right? He got his work in. A lot of extra base hits, though. But the Tigers scratched and clawed. Bottom of the eighth, the Tigers load the bases. Harold Castro flips one out to left field. Scores the tying run after Torkelson had scored on Riley Green's infield single. Now, that hit for Harold Castro was his third straight game with 3 hits or more, which puts him second in Tigers history behind 2 guys since 1960. Since 1960, there's only been 2 guys who have gone more than 3 games with 3+ hits. Maglio Ordonez in 2008, Willie Horton in 1965. And that information is courtesy of a tweet from Evan Woodbury. But Harold's got an opportunity in Game 3 to potentially tie those guys with a 3-hit night. And he's been phenomenal, and we're going to talk a lot about Harold Castro when I get to my off-season thoughts and blueprint when it comes to the Detroit Tigers. Let's talk about Game 2. Vintage Miguel Cabrera, bottom of the first inning, just flips the ball out 411 feet to left center field. It's the only 2 runs that the Tigers needed because the bullpen, comprised of Will Vest, Daniel Norris, Garrett Hill, Jose Cisnero, Andrew Chafin, Alex Lang, and Gregory Soto, gave up 1 run. And they were pressed into duty right at the beginning of the game because Matt Manning was supposed to start but scratched because of arm fatigue. And they're shutting him down for the season, as they should. Kind of a little bit of a lost season to a certain extent because of all of the time that Manning missed. But also, we saw flashes of what Manning can be and that his stuff does play at this level. He'll need to get a little bit more consistent with the slider. He'll need to develop a better, more reliable third pitch, so he's just not a 2-pitch pitcher. But he's definitely someone that can play at this level. And look, the bullpen was good. Now, after Game 2, there was a little bit more. There were a few more roster moves as well. Kerry Carpenter's going on the IL, is going to be shut down with the lumbar strain in his back, so they've recalled Cody Clemens. And then they also have selected the right-handed pitcher, Diaz. I'm blanking on his first name at the current moment, but Diaz is also going to be recalled, or his contract selected as Matt Manning goes on to the IL for the rest of the season due to that forearm fatigue. Listen, at the end of the day, there's a week left of games, starting this weekend with the Twins. They've got 3 with the Twins, and then they've got 4 with the Seattle Mariners. 7 games left after the game today against Kansas City. And this Game 3 against Kansas City is going to be a big one because if they win this game and sweep their second series in a row, it will also give them a series win against the Kansas City Royals. And it's going to be huge. So I want to talk about that series coming up with the Minnesota Twins, but before I do that, just want to remind you one more time, make sure that you hit those subscribe buttons wherever you're at on social media. Make sure you're following Detroit Sports Nation for your Detroit sports coverage for sure, but also larger sports, broader coverage because we do cover everything. So Minnesota's coming to town, and the Tigers want to keep it rolling. We have won 3 series in a row now. And the possibility of winning 4 series in a row, Minnesota has 0 to play for. With all the aspirations they came into the season with, they have 0 to play for at this point. They've been eliminated from playoff contention and even from wild card contention, as they should have been. They just have not been good enough all season long to make anything happen. But they are 6-10 against the Detroit Tigers this season. So let's talk about the pitching matchups. All right, on Friday at 7:10 is going to feature Joe Ryan against Drew Hutchinson. Ryan on the season is 12-8 with 9 strikeouts per 9 innings. He also walks about 3 per 9 innings with a 250-ish batting average on balls in play. Got a 3.70 ERA and a 4.12 FIP, which indicates that he's gotten a little bit luckier than his ERA would indicate. He hasn't pitched as well as his ERA would indicate. He's going to face off against the, ever steady, always gives him a chance to compete, Drew Hutchinson, who's 3-9. He strikes out close to about 5.5, 5.6 per 9 innings walks almost 4 per 9 innings, so that's going to be huge for him to be able to not hit that number in this game. 287 batting average on balls in play, 4.54 ERA with a 4.92 FIP. Game 2 on Saturday at 6:10. Going to feature Dylan Bundy against Tyler Alexander. Bundy on the season's 8-8 with 6 strikeouts per 9 innings, almost 2 walks per 9 innings, a 286 batting average on balls in play, 4.93 ERA, and a 4.67 FIP. And Tyler Alexander, since he has been a starter, or as a starter this season, is probably a better way to say that. He's 2-10 with a 5.32 K per 9 innings and a 2.2 walks per 9 innings. He batting average on balls and plays up at about 284. Very elevated ERA at 5.71. His overall ERA is lower because of his time spent out in the bullpen. But he has a 4.34 FIP, and truthfully, he has been pitching a lot better than those numbers would even indicate, including throwing 6 innings of no-hit baseball in Baltimore just over a week ago. So hopefully he can come in and continue to keep rolling, as the graphic says, because he's been pitching much better. On Sunday, in the series finale, in the final game with the Minnesota Twins this season, Bailey Ober is going to be taking on Joey Wentz. Ober on the season's 2-3, strikes out about 8 per 9 innings, walks almost 2 per 9 innings, 2.95 batting average on balls in play, a 3.18 ERA, but a 2.74 WHIP, indicating that he's gotten a little bit more unlucky and could be very, very good against the Tigers on Sunday. He's going to be facing off against Joey Wentz, I almost want to say bright spot for the Tigers at this point in the season. Seeing him pitch as well as he has, and the way that he can spin the baseball, get the ball up around the plate, be effective at the major league level, kind of gives you a little bit of a different concept or perception of the deal that Al Avila did make for him. I mean, we got to give credit where credit's due, as we talked about with Lynn Henning on Monday, right? The overall trades, and the overall perception of Avila may change as time goes on. It was time for him to go, but Joey Wentz is definitely part of that, the good aspect of the trades that he made. He's on the season 2-2 with a 7.39 K per 9. He walks almost 3 per 9. 241 batting average on balls in play, a 3.54 ERA, and a 3.47 FIP. So pitching pretty consistently to the numbers. You just want to see him attack the strike zone, going after hitters, making sure that he's mixing speeds and really using that cutter and changeup very effectively, depending on the righty-lefty matchup. But when we talk about the Twins, we want to talk about the bullpen, because their big trades that they made at the deadline to compete kind of failed them. They went to Baltimore, and they got Jorge Lopez, who with Baltimore had a 1.68 ERA, a 2.99 FIP, a .972 WHIP, and he struck out 3 batters to every 1 walk that he gave up. But with Minnesota, it's been a completely different story. A 5.03 ERA, a 4.59 FIP, a 1.78 WHIP, which is nearly double what it was in Baltimore. And he's only striking out about 1.2 batters for every walk that he gives up. Fulmer's been consistent. They also traded with the Tigers and got Michael Fulmer. And Fulmer's been consistent. With Detroit, he had a 3.20 ERA. With Minnesota, he's got a 3.18 ERA. With Detroit, he had a 3.22 FIP. With Minnesota, he's got a 3.60 FIP. With Detroit, he had a 1.25 WHIP. And with Minnesota, he's at a 1.50 WHIP. He's actually striking out more batters per walk than he did when he was with Detroit. But they're contributing to Minnesota having the 20th best bullpen in all of baseball. Compare that to Detroit's, that's top 10. Their bullpen is struggling, and if you want to win this series, you got to get to that bullpen. Now, they do have the 10th best offense according to Fangraphs. They walk 8% of the time. They only strike out 22% of the time. And they've created 107 runs. Or they have 107 weighted runs created is a better way to say that. About 7% above Major League average. And you want to be above Major League average when it comes to creating runs. but they're not a great fielding team. They're 19th best in all of baseball with a negative 15 outs above average, compared to the Tigers, who are, upper half of the MLB defensively, which may surprise people, but Jonathan Scope is one of the best in defensive run saves and outs against average, potentially looking at a Gold Glove. The bat's not there, but the glove definitely is. The goal here for the Tigers against Minnesota is going to be to take 2 or 3. Win the series. Win your 3rd series in a row. 4th series in a row. Baltimore, Chicago, Kansas City, Minnesota. Show the fans and show yourself that you can compete in the AL Central. Because 2022 has been tossed away. We've forgotten about it. We're going to forget about it as soon as that series in Seattle moves. But to end the season with 3 series wins against 3 division rivals would go a long way to kind of removing the stank that's on this season. And they can do it. I think they're set up to do it as long as they keep hitting the ball well. And one key thing that they've done in this Royal Series that they need to do in this Minnesota Series is when the ball's put in play, you got to turn it into outs. When you have runners on base, you got to turn that into runs. And the Tigers have been doing that better since the series in Baltimore. Again, I call it the Scott Harris effect. Everybody watched that opening presser. Everybody is hopefully taking that to heart. So hopefully they'll go out on the season with a high note, which brings us to our final segment, and that's going to be revisiting the playoff picture. Okay, I gave you some predictions a few shows ago. I think it was like episode 30, which would have been 6 shows ago or about 3 weeks ago. And here are my predictions. We'll see how they're going. I predicted the division winners to be the Yankees, the Guardians, and the Astros. Now, that was pretty easy, right? Like, I'm not going to pat myself on the back for being correct on that. I also predicted that the Mets would win, the Cardinals would win, and the Dodgers would win. So far, I'm 2 for 3 on that one, with the Mets having a 1-game lead over the Atlanta Braves and a huge series with the Braves starting Friday night. Again, that wasn't really a difficult call because the only one that was really up in the air, especially based on strength of schedule, was the NL East. But the Mets only have a 1-game lead over Atlanta, so that could go either way. In the wild card, here's what I predicted. I predicted Toronto, Seattle, and Minnesota. I was clearly wrong about Minnesota. I thought they'd turn it around. I was wrong. In the NL, I predicted Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee. All of them, who are still in the mix. But let's look at the AL wildcard picture, because right now Toronto has a 2-game lead over Tampa Bay, who has a half-game lead over Seattle. Those are your 3 wildcard teams right now: Tampa Bay, Toronto, and Seattle. Right now, Toronto would host Tampa Bay and would have full home field advantage in those 3 games. Seattle would then travel to the 3rd seed if the season ended today in Cleveland. We'll get into that in a minute. But what you have sitting outside of the wild card race is the Baltimore Orioles, who are 4.5 games back. Tampa Bay, who's in the 2nd wild card spot, has a 5-game lead on Baltimore with about 7 to play. Seattle has a 4.5-game lead on Baltimore with about 7 to play. Now, Baltimore has 7 games left. And Seattle has 8 games left because Seattle has a doubleheader with the Tigers next week on Tuesday. So that game could be significant based upon how the Baltimore-Boston series goes this weekend. If Baltimore sweeps those and the Mariners lose a game or two, they could make the Tigers put the Tigers in a position to play spoiler again in Seattle. Now, look, I'm rooting for Seattle to a certain extent because I'd like to see them end a 20-year playoff drought. I think Julio Rodriguez is a phenomenal player, and I think they have a really good team. But I also would love for the Tigers to spoil a season on the last week of the season. I'd love for them to spoil Seattle's run. Be phenomenal. It'd be phenomenal, especially because Baltimore is the team that we thought the Tigers were going to be this season. They are who we thought the Tigers should have been, but are not. So if the season ended today, here's what we're looking at. In the AL, you would have the Yankees in Houston with byes, and Cleveland would host Seattle in a best-of-3 with the winner playing New York. In the other wildcard matchup, you'd have Toronto playing the Tampa Bay Rays in a best-of-3 series and the winner playing Houston. in the NL. As of right now, if the season ended today, the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers would both have byes during that wild card round. St. Louis would host Philadelphia in a best of 3, and Atlanta would host San Diego in a best of 3. Now, the Atlanta and San Diego winner will go on to play the Los Angeles Dodgers. The St. Louis and Philadelphia winner would go on to play the New York Mets. And here's the takeaway that we can have from this before we take off for the day. We have 7 games left. We have a week left. 2 series for each team. It's going to come down to the end for the New York Mets and the Atlanta Braves. It could potentially come down to the end for the AL wildcard, and will come down to the end for the NL wildcard as well, because the Philadelphia Phillies are barely holding on to that final spot with a half-game lead over the Milwaukee Brewers. It's going to be very interesting because I predicted that San Diego would not make the playoffs. They could potentially make the playoffs because they do have a lead, but they also have some games against the Los Angeles Dodgers here pretty quick. And so, I'm looking forward to the next 2 series because they're going to obviously give us our playoff picture. There's nothing like baseball, playoff baseball, October baseball when it comes to sports, and I cannot wait for it to get started. That is going to do it for us on the corner today. I am AJ Riley. I will be back with you on Monday for another edition of the corner to recap the Minnesota series and preview the final series of the year with the Seattle Mariners. I do want to remind you to make sure that you follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you're at on social media. Follow Detroit Sports Nation. You can also follow the corner at DSN at the corner. And until next time,